First, I'll introduce myself. I am Lauden Nassarian. I am the success engineer here at Segment. Thank you. We also have a Twitter hashtag. So if anything memorable comes up, feel free to tweet #DataEng. If you're a little bit shy during our Q&A process, you can definitely tweet a question and we'll answer them as well there. Just to start off, Segment, if you're not familiar, is a data platform. We help you pipe data into different tools and a warehouse with one simple SDK. I also want to thank Haka Labs, who helped support this event. They are a community for data engineers and are located in San Francisco and New York. To get started, I just want to kind of get an idea of who's here. Is anyone here from like a growth team at their company? Raise your hands if you are. Cool. How about any engineers? Any data analysts? Anyone from product? A little bit there. How about anybody uncomfortable raising their hands? There's a few of you. All right. All right, cool. So we'll get started. So we're all here kind of to hear a little bit about capturing high-quality data on mobile devices, which hasn't really been the easiest thing to do. We've seen some really great companies manage to overcome these hurdles and acquire really actionable insights on their users and make products that everybody really loves. So today we will be talking to data engineers and analysts at Pandora, Instacart, Invoice2Go, GameTime, and Branch about how they measure behavior across devices, what tools they use, and how data plays into their product and business decisions. So I will introduce our panelists. We have Che Hordor, who is Director of Analytics at Instacart and previously led a data science and engineering team at Netflix as the Director of Marketing Analytics. We have Gautam Joshi, who is the Engineering Program Manager of Analytics at Pandora and formerly worked at CNET, CBSI, and RDO. We have Mada Seghit, who is the co-founder of Branch Metrics, a powerful tool that helps mobile app developers use data and deep linking to grow and optimize their apps. We have Beth Jubera, who is the Senior Software Engineer at Invoice2Go and was previously a Systems Engineer at IBM. And last but not least, we have John Hession, who is the VP of Growth at GameTime. So just to start off, we can go down the line, and if you want to expand on what is your role at your company and a little bit more about what you do, Che, do you want to start off?
Sure. I lead the data and analytics team at Instacart. We work on primarily 3 different things. We do, the first is data engineering. So we collect all of our data from all of our internal systems, external systems, get them in one place, get it well organized. Second thing we do is kind of reporting. We try and enable a self-service reporting solution for everybody in the company to get at the data they want and do whatever analysis they might want to do with it. And the third thing we do is the deeper analysis. So we do things like we run A/B experiments. We do some more strategic analysis on measuring things at Instacart that matter, like the growth of our customer base and the growth of our supply, our labor supply base, and making sure growth is in balance, and many other problems like that.
So I get to work on a lot of fun things related to analytics engineering. I came over from RDO to Pandora, and as I like to tell people, I get to work on all the same things, but with a bigger budget and a bigger team. So it's pretty fun. It's worked out for me so far. So I'm on a team that handles all of the ETL from all of our transactional systems to Hadoop. And I get to jump into the more fun things like A/B testing and anomaly detection for all these sources. So more nuanced analysis than I got to do before at RDO, where I was trying to build a data warehouse, which is also fun. And I get to do some project management on the side to keep things moving forward.
Cool. As a co-founder, I guess I do a little bit of everything, but I manage our developer marketing and community teams. And I started our marketing team, and I had no idea how to do marketing, so everything we did was an experiment. So people would say, you should start a meetup. OK, great, let's try, and then I measure it. you should go and do Facebook ads in India. OK, great, let's do it and then measure it. So I use a lot. I still like to look at all the data that we gather across our different teams and sometimes try to understand and gain insights into and testing into things that we do. So a lot of, we think we're in a new space, so going after mobile app developers and teaching them about ad branches, sometimes hard to measure. So a lot of my time is spent, how do we measure events and other marketing activities and understand if they were good or not, or if they had an impact on us.
Hi, I'm Beth. I'm a data engineer at Invoice2Go. So as Jay talked to, I work really tightly with our product growth, user acquisition, marketing, and analyst teams to make sure they have all the data they need. And we work really closely with our partners. I should say Segment is one of our partners. And make sure everybody gets the information they need to do their jobs. So I'm previously at IBM. So when I moved over to Invoice2Go, the whole mobile space was very new to me. Being an engineer on an enterprise product is very different than being in a startup mobile app world. So all the ad tech was very new. And so learned a lot in the last couple of years, and happy to share.
And I'm John. I head up growth for Game Time. Game Time, if you don't know, is a mobile app for buying tickets to sporting events and concerts all over the country. So I spend most of my time working very closely with my team on figuring out how to solve experiments every week to improve user acquisition and retention primarily. We also work very closely with the product team to run A/B tests and figure out how we're going to tweak the UI and different things to improve our key KPIs. We're about a 60-person startup, so we're very much in, break it and fix it and experiment every week, and data is all we care about.
Awesome, thanks guys. So kind of to get started, I thought we could talk a little bit about infrastructure, and I think Che and Gautam, you can answer this maybe best. How have you kind of dealt with web presence versus mobile presence, and how do you focus on one over the other? I mean, Pandora, maybe specifically, you could speak to this as well.
Sure. So Pandora has definitely gone all in with the mobile experience, and whether it's analysis or tracking around the mobile experience and trying to work on conversion at that level. We have a healthy web presence as well, but I think we've been criticized for not spending enough time on web or on our desktop apps. Maybe some of you can speak to that as well. So I'd say the majority of our time, whether it comes to web or mobile, is definitely on mobile. And it was a little different back at RDO because we were much smaller, for instance, we were much younger, and we had we were much closer to the early days of our very loyal web and desktop users. So we were definitely focused probably about 30% of the time on web. I'd say that's much smaller at Pandora. Maybe a different experience.
At Instacart, we have two different experiences that we're developing for. The first one is a consumer, but I'll talk about the second one, our shopper experience. So at Instacart, we're doing on-demand grocery delivery, and our labor force, all of our shoppers that are in the stores fulfilling orders, are mobile only. So there's no choice there. They can't be sitting on a laptop in a store trying to fulfill orders. So that app and that set of experiences is all mobile. On the other side, on the consumer side, we started as an iOS app, and then we grew into having a web presence and Android. When it comes to choosing where to work, we typically work across all platforms, and we typically work on features that cross all platforms. And we typically also let the data tell us where there's the most impact to have on the consumer experience and the specific goals that we're trying to work on at the time. We do find that we typically, when we need to move fast and maybe iterate quickly on a new feature and experiment that we just want to test out, that we'll often do that in the web experience because you don't have the app release cycles to work through. I think we're improving our mobile apps such that we can do more of that experimentation kind of server side on the mobile app, but we still have a ways to go there, so we can move a little bit faster in the desktop experience.
Great. And then speaking still to tools, Beth, you might have an interesting perspective on this, kind of being new to the mobile marketing space. How have you come to decide on which tools to use and kind of play around with that?
So working with our user acquisition team, they go through due diligence, and it's really easy for them. You talked about mobile versus desktop. We have a attribution SDK in our mobile apps. So that's how we do all our ad tracking. And then we use Adjust. And through Adjust, we can sample. I'll just be promoting whoever. We can sample, and it's really easy for us to experiment with different companies and see how their inventory for ads stacks up against other inventories for ads. And so that's mostly handled by our user acquisition team, and we kind of turn on and off as the days go by. That being said, we can use, if we're talking just ad tech, everything for us is device ID driven. So we have users come in, we're mobile first, but we have a lot of Google search on desktop that leads people into our ads. And everything for us is UTM on the web, and then we use tracking and events on desktop. And how do we tie those together? Everything's on device IDs, user level tracking. So wrapping that up, we experiment with the different ad tech, and then we use, cool. That's it.
Awesome. And then, so speaking with tools as well, with branch metrics, how have you kind of decided to build out what branch metrics handles, and did you see kind of some failures in the industry and you were trying to build from there, or did you kind of have a different approach?
Yeah, so we actually we built Branch because we first built an app, and we were trying to build links in the app, and we're trying to build a referral system, and we were doing ads, and we were trying to understand. We actually wanted to customize the first-time user experience based on where someone came from. So I was doing marketing and running ads and we figured out that for this app that we had, our two main customers were moms with young children, and then teenagers in long-distance relationships. And moms were more likely to buy 5 books at a time, while teenagers were not likely to buy, but they were very likely to share with someone. So I wanted, if someone came from an ad campaign that I was doing for teenagers, to just show them sharing right away, versus if I knew someone was a mom, to show them the first time, buy 5 books and get the 6th off or something like that. And there was no way to know that. And that's actually why we built Branch. Branch is basically one hosted link that enables you to append any kind of parameters, then recognizes where a user clicks, and then gives you those parameters. So you can customize the first user experience, you can do organic attribution, and so forth. So we built it to actually solve our own problem that we had. It took off, and it was much better in the app, so we ended up selling the app as an asset, but we kept the same company and the same founders. Which I think is actually the story of many companies, I'm not Segment included.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why we build Branch. When it comes to our own tools, we use a lot of other third-party providers for our own in-house data, like Mixpanel and Google Analytics and HubSpot and others. So we don't build all our tools in-house. But when it comes to our own dashboard, we actually tried using other providers to take all the data that we gather and show it in interesting funnels, and we found that it was too slow, and we ended up building it in-house because it was too hard to work with a third-party provider. All the third-party providers took seconds to load, and we can't have that in our dashboard. So.
Interesting. John, we were talking a little bit about all the different tools you guys use, and you're at this kind of stage where you're introducing tools and kind of looking at the future 6 months down the line. How have you guys decided and tested tools on your end since you guys are mobile only?
Yes. So we set up all of our tools about 2-3 years ago. At that time, we didn't really have, or at least we weren't quite aware, and I think Segment was pretty new at that time, and similar companies were also pretty new. So there wasn't this consolidator of the pipes. And so what we did was just pick the SDKs that we felt would work, and we met with people, and we integrated Tune at the time for attribution. We integrated Mixpanel for analytics. And then we realized, of course, Tune couldn't handle Facebook and Twitter for attribution. So we added Localytics. And then we passed all of our Tune data over to Localytics. And now, to this day, we still use Localytics for a lot of our attribution, user acquisition analysis, essentially all of the data that we that we have by source, by campaign, and we take a dump from Localytics into our Redshift, and then, also in Redshift we have mixed panel data, and then we have our purchases data, which is in like MongoDB. And so we're still in that world where we've got lots of different databases, systems, tools, maybe like 20 SDKs. Our engineers hate me, but that's kind of where we're at, and it's working. And because we need to move really fast, we're not quite ready to slow down and move to like phase 2 of our data infrastructure. And we're also sort of averse to trying out new tools right now, because we're like, okay, we have tools, they're good, and a lot of our team's gotten very good about learning SQL and just running their own analysis, and we use like Periscope to visualize all the data that we pull. And for the time being, it's a pretty good solution.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's nice to see and hear that there's tools that do really well for certain things, and sometimes you see that you wouldn't take the burden of building things out on your own. You trust that tool to take care of that. Moving on to some data-driven decision type questions. What are ways that you've used data to improve mobile customer experience? And this could be open to anybody if you have a kind of story in mind.
Anyone want to take it? I'll take it. I have a few of these for sure. One thing that immediately comes to mind is push messaging. So as a mobile app, we do a lot of push messaging, and we like the idea of surprising you with push that feels right, of course, and feels very well targeted. We probably don't always do the best job of that because of some of the limitations of our data, but one of the examples of a push that I think we do well is what we call our price alert push. So Game Time is an app, for buying tickets, so you're constantly in the app looking around at different price points for different events and different concerts. And so we'll track the lowest price ticket that you're looking at, and if that ticket drops in price over a certain period of time, we'll send you a push to notify that, the event that you were interested, the ticket that you were looking at, dropped in price. And we don't actually have the ability for you to customize your price alerts. Maybe that's something we'll build, but we like the idea of doing that for you and not having you, and making it and doing it right. So in order to do it right, getting the data right on that is critical. And I think we're probably only about 75% of the way in terms of how accurate that message is.
I can tell a story about one of our customers. So it was a friend of mine, actually, Zaid. So he works for Gogobot. And I kept trying to convince him to customize the first user experience using the links. And he was like, no, our product team really cares about taking people through the onboarding flow and showing them the onboarding flow. And I don't want to customize the first time user experience because then they won't go to the onboarding flow. I was like, well, why don't you just test it? You can send half the users to a customized experience and then the other half to a random screen, like the regular screen, and they go through the onboarding experience. So they did a test where basically if I share something from Gogobot, which is a travel app with you, let's say if I want to go to San Diego and I come up with a travel list and I share it with you, you come from my link, you install the app, and the first thing you see is my face and says, welcome from Mada. Here's the list of things she's sharing with you, and then you go on that and you don't go through the onboarding flow versus just the regular one. And just the customization itself actually ended up almost doubling. I think it was 78% increase in the amount of people who signed up and gave their email. It went from, I think it was 28%. That's not in our case study, but those are the numbers. So from 28% to, I think, over 50% of people who are giving their email just because they saw something from a friend versus just a regular. And that was something that was surprising, they didn't expect. So they made sure that if someone is coming to the app from a personal invite from someone, they're just not taken to the onboarding flow. They're first taken to the thing that they want and then taken to the flow. And I think we did an experiment like that together, and it was I talked about it in a webinar this morning, but basically a similar thing. Skipping the onboarding flow if someone's sharing tickets with someone and just taking them to the tickets directly, it really improves the conversion to purchase or to whatever you want them to convert in.
Yeah, and we do use branch as well. And And I think that's a great example. I mean, for e-commerce in general, it works really well. For ticketing, it's really interesting because you are acquiring users oftentimes based on a very specific event that you know that they're interested in, even not just a team, but a specific matchup. And so if you can bring them to that matchup, it's essentially like, selling them the ticket right there in the channel that they're being acquired, or the next best thing, which is to get them, into the app and then right to that ticket.
You can onboard them later, but take them to the thing. If you know what they're looking for, take them to that right away. Because you can teach them how to use the rest of your app after they've gone to the thing that they were interested in.
At Rdio, we were trying to change the returning user experience, especially on the second visit, and we had all these theories about how we could do a major redesign essentially to create a feed, a music feed as we called it in-house. It was the home screen, the new home screen that would allow you to see, since Rdio is all about social discovery of music, you could see what your friends are adding to playlists or what your friends are listening to or adding to their collection. So we spent an obscenely long time designing this really beautiful music feed. It ended up being very beautiful, both on web and mobile. And we added all of this instrumentation to make it possible to change the weighting of various story types, like the playlist story. If you're a playlister as a listener, then playlist-related stories should be more important in your feed because you probably care about what's activity on your own playlists since you've invested so much time in them. So we had all of these hooks in there to do all this optimization down the line after we launched. And we realized eventually through segment tracking enabled through amplitude, seeing this in a session view, that everyone just wanted to see the last thing they listened to last time they were in the app, which after we realized that, it just made so much sense. And we were like, yeah, I guess we really overthought that one. So we had this keep listening story that was probably below the fold originally, but we just pinned it to the top of the music feed, and suddenly 30% more people were listening on their second visit. And we're like, oh yeah, it's great.
We had a situation at Instacart. On the shopper side, on the shopper app, we've been looking at kind of using our mobile events and the event tracking, and we use Segment, and we use Amplitude, and we use our own internal reporting, and we use our analysts to dig into all the data. But through digging into the data, we've been trying to find kind of friction points in doing the job of being a shopper. So these shoppers have their app out in the store, they've got the items that they're supposed to be looking for in the store, and then they find the items and they have to do a couple things like scan the code on the item and then say I've got it and move on to the next one, right? And so they're doing this process over and over and over again, and we look through kind of where they spend their time in all of these events, and we found a bunch of things, but one of them, mobile specific, was that we found that these shoppers were just faster and more efficient if they were on an iOS device versus an Android device. And so we dug into that a little bit more and kind of peeled back the layers, and we discovered that some specific Android devices were not very good at looking at scanning and kind of taking images, and their cameras weren't as good. And so we were able to identify which ones those were, and now we're actually actively finding workarounds for these shoppers so that they can become faster, and also they're probably frustrated shoppers too, not very happy with having to do a repetitive task that doesn't function very well for them. So we have some workarounds in the process, and we're running experiments to find the best way to do it.
Interesting, cool, awesome. So, just kind of building off on that, how do you wish, or what would be your ideal situation with regards to how do you wish you're using your data? Obviously, you guys have worked really hard to get this actionable information, and you're using it pretty effectively, but is there kind of a dream scenario you would have, or a quick turnaround with that? If anyone can speak to that. Maybe.
I have one. If anyone is starting out on event tracking or getting into tracking, our wish list, we use Amplitude for our growth team to be able to look at customer flows, event flows, see based on what someone's done, what they're doing next. And when we first got into tracking, everybody kind of went, yes, let's track everything. And we did, and now nobody knows what anything means. And so people are like, we know we have events that track paywall views and paywall conversions and every panel of our onboarding flow and every button click on our onboarding flow, but nobody knows quite what they're called and how they're different between iOS and Android. And so in our wish list, we would have a beautiful, clean tracking like page and dictionary, and everything would be really laid out. So that would be my wish, and my wish to you if you go forward and are building out your tracking, to be very diligent and really come up with a plan for how you're going to be naming your experiments and naming the properties that you might be basing your experiments on. It gets really big really fast if no one's paying attention, especially across devices. So that would be my...
I'm going to double down on that one, actually. If I were to wish anything, it would be some well-thought-out taxonomy for your events and for the naming of those events. And I think one key thing is to make sure that taxonomy is consistent across your different platforms, right? And so we've done a decent job, but certainly not the best. And so we still have events that you're looking through all the kind of unique events, and you're like, who the heck named this one, and what does this mean? It doesn't follow the standard. And so we're actively kind of working on kind of the methods that go in and write the events. We're trying to enforce some kind of naming conventions and hierarchies kind of within that. And we have like one common method that does actually write the same events out for each of the different platforms.
Do you have a question?
Can I ask a totally selfish question here as a member of the second team? If there were one feature that Second could build that could help you in enforcing this kind of thing, whether it be like blacklisting events or whitelisting events, or a plan where maybe you would like add events that you're thinking about, that kind of thing. If there were just one thing that we could build that would help in this.
That's for me. Yeah, I would think of.
Yeah.
I think the concept of a dictionary and a taxonomy and the way to like manage that and then kind of enforce it would be the one thing. That would be the one thing I would want. An easy way to create it, manage it, and then kind of enforce it.
The one thing that comes to mind for me is either software or just advice on proper smoke testing of your existing data tracking that you can run before you release. So I feel like every company that I've talked to, every team on the panel here has said that their data gets broken constantly, and that certainly happens for us as well. And so it oftentimes leaves like pretty egregious gaps in certain months where we just lack data. And so that's happened a few times, and so I definitely think creating, working with your QA team or your engineers is just create smoke tests that they can run and be more productive. Because everyone, especially in a startup, is trying to move super fast, and so you can't blame people for getting these things out, and they're always under pressure to get releases out. But it does have a pretty monumental impact on the business potentially if things break. So smoke tests or mechanisms of doing that. I like the blacklisting idea. To be able to turn things on and off and just customize your view so that maybe someone who's new and learning doesn't get dumped in front of like every single possible event and spends like 5 hours trying to sort through that, but instead has, a legitimate like glossary of events,
Kind of building off of that, how do you decide that you're going to make a breaking change, and how do you kind of deal with that on the reporting side?
How do you decide that you're going to make a break in what?
Like in your reporting, like,
Nobody decides that.
Nobody decides that.
That is an accident.
That is not something we try to do, for sure.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But you do have to make that decision. Are you going to take the effort to like rename everything?
Right.
Going forward, it'll all be clean, but all the apps that are out in the wild, are you going to set up the mapping? Historically, we're all trying to move fast. It's a lot of work, a lot of effort, and we all have apps in the wild that are doing different things.
So like the ideal situation would be you wouldn't have those moments come up ever again. It would just be beautiful.
If someone refactors code and they wipe out your tracking event, and all of a sudden you don't know what happened, like how many people signed up that day. That's terrible. So
I feel like it's totally unavoidable. like at the beginning, when we were first setting up our tracking, I thought, this is great, I'm in here early, we're putting some real thought into what we're gonna track and what tools we're gonna use, and I feel good about the various tools that we're using. And looking back, it could have been way better, and it could have been way more comprehensive, or, you know, and now we're just like everyone else, so we have, you know, the events that have the same exact name, except one has capital letters and the other doesn't, right? So it's like, people just screw up the taxonomy and things like that. Happens very frequently.
But do you think it's better to have bad, like incomplete or like differences? I think it's better to have the data and someone can always figure it out. It just
definitely
just takes more time. So
yeah, it's
good to have it.
Breaking changes in nomenclature can go really well with like full site redesigns or full app redesigns, because everyone is in a new territory anyway. I don't know. We tried to line them up that way, which had its own trade-offs, but.
Yeah. Coming from like such a large company, and you mentioned kind of using a lot of different tools, and it sounds like there's a lot of different factors with Pandora. How do you guys communicate with each other to make sure that you can prevent those instances of like, you know?
We have an extensive wiki that has similar problems to the event naming conventions. There are a lot of pages. I mean, wikis are only so useful in any context. They're like immediately outdated as soon as they're published. So a lot of it is, I mean, since we're a big company, we also have a ton of meetings. So there are a lot of like kind of official or unofficial like governing councils of areas of the product or of the platform that are not officially owned by a full team. So we have a lot of like kind of unofficial councils looking after you know, things like naming conventions or various processes that support multiple teams but are not fully owned. But it's an ongoing process. I mean, I've been asking that question of everyone that I meet for the last 5 years probably, and I haven't heard a great silver bullet answer.
So John, obviously, like you said, you were smaller, so you kind of have all teams dabbling in everything. How do you kind of use that data that you collect within every team, or how does your different people on each side of the facets of the company use that data differently?
We basically all have learned how to use, not all of us, but maybe 60% of us have learned how to use SQL and use Periscope. So Periscope is our tool for visualizing the data. All the data is in Redshift. Not everyone knows what's in what table, obviously.
Yeah.
But you know, in little worlds, people know I need to access this table, and they get permission to read-only access to that table, and they learn how to, you know, do lookups and pull data. We end up with tons of Periscope charts or dashboards, and you know, only a few of them are actually ones that we use for core company like KPI tracking. But the nice part of that is it does get everyone into the data, and it's critical for all of us to be thinking with a data mindset around how are we going to move this number forward. And the whole company is organized around, you know, a limited set of KPIs that each team is focused on moving. Did that answer your question?
No, that was great.
Okay.
Beth, you sounded like you wanted to.
Oh no, I was just saying we use Periscope too. So Periscope and Amplitude are pretty much how everyone, and Elation, which is a query in the cloud, you can share queries around. Those are the main ways that people access our data. And we have an open Redshift. Anybody in the company can access it. And we have to be very careful because we don't want people walking into meetings with the CEO at noon and then later at 4 telling him different numbers on our number of subscribers. So we have a set of tables that are very, like, these are the core tables that we've built up with the help of our analytics team. We have a very, very, very wide customer 360 table that is our view of a ton of customer metrics that we build as part of the ETL team that people can run off of and make different decisions. We do a lot of models on engagement scores, retention scores, churn rates, things like that. Why would people come back in?
That's what we want.
We got it.
we want an ETL team.
Oh, well.
That's going to run models on all those different customer metrics. That's my dream state, or hopefully within the next year.
That's worked really well for us, actually. We have these models, and then that's what we use mostly for our reattribution sorry, not reattribution, retargeting campaigns. So it's really nice to know we're an invoicing company. If people haven't uploaded a logo or if they haven't created their first invoice or emailed an invoice to a customer yet, we can do really targeted retargeting ads. That's why we have a dashboard called reattribution. Really nice retargeting ads and campaigns based on those, and as well as lean plum experiments based on those properties.
So how do you actually transport, like kind of activate that analysis if that's happening in SQL or somewhere off your 360 table? Like, how do you get that into your retargeting?
So a lot of our partners allow for server-side uploads. So at the end of the day, or once a day or twice a day, we'll upload like customer's dot count, their expiration date, all these different attributes. We do a lot for like reg to sub, click to sub, and so we know if users have been, if they created an account 4 months ago and still haven't subbed, we can target them differently than someone who subbed or who regged 2 weeks ago and have created 30 invoices. We can do very different things. So we use mostly either server-side uploads, or with Lean Plum, we just, in parallel, we track events to segment in Lean Plum and then can say if someone hasn't done this action yet or has done this action yet, we can do targeted in-app messaging or push notifications based on these events.
So do you sort of re-identify those users back or segment those?
Right, so on the iOS, because we're mobile first, but we have a lot of desk-side activity as well, and so we use everything through device ID, I mentioned, is so important on the mobile side, and then we can tie that all back through account IDs on desk side and server side. So we can map, adjust to any Lean Plum experiments and other campaigns we have going on.
So I kind of wanted to see if any of you guys had like an aha moment with data, like, you know, like a story where, you know, you've spent so much time to implement these analytic tools and you've collected all this data. Obviously, like you spoke to Pandora's kind of last played, or, you know, that was a huge moment for you. Do any of you guys have that kind of moment of, this is awesome, I've collected this and now I can like alter my product and really make things work as I expect them to?
I can talk about something. So one of the big ways we grow is actually to content marketing. So because Branch is very much a tool that's like kind of, you can do a lot of things with it. I think the main way we can actually get people to use us is by explaining the things you can do. So we write a lot of blog posts. And SEO is important to us, so we decided to write, you know, we write things and then we notice that they just don't go up on the front page. It's like, okay, what can we do? So we also do a lot of paid ads. And we started trying to do paid ads and getting traffic and shares for a specific piece of content. And guess what happened? As soon as we look at all the data, and as soon as we go after like 10,000 page views on a specific piece of content, boom, it's on the front page. And it goes from like page 10 to page first. So we try to say, is it the traffic or is it the social sharing? So we try buying the same type of traffic in different international markets. And some markets are a lot more likely, if you promote a post, to click, and other markets are a lot more likely to like and share. And actually, we saw a very strong correlation. It's not just the traffic, but it's actually the social shares that help you boost the SEO of your content. And that was like a really interesting experiment. And now, I don't know, that's kind of like, feels like the secret that we uncovered that probably everyone already knew, that if you can use paid advertising in developing countries to get like social likes and shares of your content and boost your SEO. And we've tried it over and over again. It always works. Google might change that at some point, but for now, getting social shares of your content actually really helps your SEO, and that's something that we found through data and experimentation.
We've, I feel like kind of our company, like you mentioned before, focuses on a couple set of key metrics, and kind of we refocus every 2 months or something like that. And I feel like every time we do that, we go through a series of aha moments because we're focused on something new. And the state, Instacart is 4 years old, and so we're still like learning so much and just on the cusp of things. So I feel like it happens very regularly. a while back, we pivoted and said, okay, we're going to focus on growth, and we're going to really like kind of try and move this. And one of the obvious and first aha moments that we came across was that if you want to grow and you want customers to order more, you have to have your service be available. And our service availability is tied to our labor and our supply force, right? And so it became very clear that if we wanted to actually grow, we needed to balance those two things. And so we've used data to have a model to help us forecast demand and then bring supply along with it. We have to kind of be in balance, we've discovered, because if we have too much supply and not enough demand, then you end up with very bored shoppers or underpaid shoppers, and so you get out of balance. But if you have too much demand and not enough supply, then customers can't fulfill orders, and they're not having a very good experience. If you go to Instacart for an on-demand grocery delivery and you can't get it till next Friday, that's not a very good experience either. So yeah, but I feel like we kind of revisit them like monthly.
I want to follow up on that, and this may be obvious to everyone in the room, but we like to make data-driven decisions, right? Like that's what we do. That's why we're here, and we like to optimize for a metric, and we believe in someone owning a metric at Invoice2go. But you need to have, you can't just have the one metric that everyone moves towards, or things fall apart. You will optimize too much for that metric. You need to have competing metrics that complement each other. Otherwise, that was our aha moment. If you optimize for one thing, it's all going to fall apart eventually. You're going to run into something where you get 1 million registered users because whatever you're offering or whatever you're doing, and then it's going to fall apart on the other end. So we've had I can't think of any offhand, but it seems like we're always having to rebalance our metrics or figure out the opposing metric to complement that. A funny one, this is kind of a not to do, but we live and die by our App Store reviews, and so we all have our like pop-ups for having people review, and so we got a ton of App Store reviews, and they're all stop asking me to review your app. Like, whoops. So stuff like that. You got to make sure that you're balancing yin and yang.
Yeah, I think about the aha moment thing a lot. It's like everyone always writes about it, reads about it. I think we have a lot of little wins that I like to think are ahas. They may not be business changing, but as you were saying, like in our KPIs and the experiments that we run against those KPIs, we do have wins. One that I like is probably, well, what we do, actually what I'd like to kind of talk about more is the process, and one of the things I think is really important to look at for any app or website is retention as one of the key KPIs, right? If you can't get customers to come back, you really don't have a business. So we constantly run against tons of different segments of customers or users. We constantly run retention curve analysis, and everyone has their own definition of retention. It could be whatever, but if it's like install to open or whatever it is, we'll constantly look at different cohorts by week and cut them by whatever behavior they took in the app to try to find definitive lifts in that retention curve. And that's sort of step one. And then once we find that lift, we're optimizing for the overlap between like the maximum number of users that we can potentially nudge to get to that point or to take that step or complete that behavior or that action in the app that we know will cause them to retain better. So finding that is really hard. A lot of times along the way, I think you find small wins that move the needle just slightly. For us, we kind of always fall back on we just need to get that first purchase. And that first purchase generally is like a game changer in terms of retention. So that's kind of our big core action that we drive towards. But in advance of that, there are a lot of little things along the way that we're constantly looking at, whether it's like opens or specific things that you do in the app. And yeah.
Awesome. So I think we have some time to open up for some Q&A in the audience. If anybody has any questions that they want to kind of present, yeah.
Right, right. I'll speak for us. We just haven't taken the time to, we could always do it downstream and clean it up and make, well, actually, that's kind of not true. We use segments autoload into Redshift. So when we have integrations with Segment to partners, so we send their data to Amplitude, we send to other sites, we can't, it's already out. It's through their SDK to our partners. Once it's in Redshift and we want to run SQL on it, then we can do whatever we want with it and fix it downstream. But when it's getting sent off to partners, then it becomes a problem.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. When it, we had so many situations where we were trying to reduce the friction between an event being, like a feature being created and the event to track it being created by ideally the same person working on the feature so that it gels correctly. And the last step, which is someone actually analyzing the downstream effects of this. And reducing the friction also means, you know, making it completely democratic, and it's just, there's a constant trade-off between those two that will, I mean, it'll work differently for different applications, certainly, but yeah, as you said, there's no great solution.
I think one of the things we've tried to implement at Instacart is having an analyst involved in the product teams and close with the product teams. And what we've found is that, you know, engineers developing product are thinking about what it takes for the product to work for the customer, and maybe not thinking about to analyze if it's working for the customer or not. And so if you have an analyst kind of right in with the product teams, they can be thinking about the instrumentation and how they might kind of fit in the events with the taxonomy and whatnot. And so it's just like a different role to play in the product team. And having that role, I think, is just it just helps you, you know, after you've launched, it helps you kind of be able to analyze, you know, be able to think about what does success mean for that feature, and then have the right events in place to understand if you are being successful or not. So it's maybe just a different role. Somebody who thinks about things differently.
It's on all our feature specs. What are your metrics? What are your tracking events? And we switched from being device to cross-feature and how things are rolled out, and that's helped a lot because then there's one PM that owns like onboarding, and so they own across all devices and keep an eye on it rather than trying to communicate across all the devices and web.
Yeah, putting the onus on people further up the decision-making process on what is the actual goal is always going to work out well for data engineers and analysts.
End of the day, they're the ones that are looking at it in Amplitude or whatever Mixpanel, so let them have it.
Any other questions? Yeah, I think we have a mic coming too, because it was a little hard to.
I mean, some of your companies are basically available across web, mobile web, and apps. I mean, so how are you guys building, I mean, like a single profile across platforms and then kind of understanding a single profile? I mean, how far are you guys there?
Yeah, so through Segment's user traits versus event properties, we were able to like really nicely kind of decouple how we treated users on different platforms, and we would, and you know, that user would gel as a single user in Segment's system, and downstream of that, it was all together. So Segment really took the pain out of that for us. We had, you know, a lot of different consumer electronics devices, whether it's RDO or Pandora, in addition to web and mobile, and like cars are a big thing. So pushing different, I mean, having completely different views of the user from the developer's perspective was totally supported by being able to just push literally anything and have it gel on the Segment side.
We push user and visitor IDs kind of into all of the events so that we can tie them back later and you know, see what platform they were on and stuff at a later point in time, but use those kind of common keys so that we can do the matching later.
Yeah, it's really important to have a unique identifier for a user, which is an interesting thing that we've run into that I don't know how common this is, but we have a unique user ID, but like Skip here in the front row is Skip. But Skip can have different accounts with us. He might have, aside from his lawn business, he might have a snow business in the winter. And so when we're looking at things like document counts and things like that, it's hard to know who we're dealing with. So there's some interesting things that we have had to deal with in that area. So.
Do you guys require a sign up front? So do you typically use like registration data to match?
Right now we do, yes. But again, it's Skip in one, Skip in the other. But it's still Skip. So we need to treat him as we know him to be. But he has these two businesses with different things going on. So when we send him.
Yeah, I think about that a lot because we're still very much mobile only, so very much focused on just driving installs, and yet we do have web traffic and it is increasing, and we have a sign-up event that is much further down the funnel. And so there's a lot of user activity that takes place where we just know you as an IFA and you know, whatever other internal IDs, whatever other 20 internal IDs we have for you. And so at some point matching that ID to, you know, to someone who may have come in from the web or just joining two profiles based on that can be tricky. And there's fingerprinting solutions, I think, for stuff like that, cross-device fingerprinting solutions. I think they're all about the same in terms, maybe Mata can speak to this a little bit better, but you know, they're generally all, I think, about 80% effective or in that ballpark, some better, some worse.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something that everyone is asking for. When someone opens an app, if they could know that this is the user that like just looked at shoes on their mobile website, and we're building a solution for that. So we're pulling data from everyone and to try to understand persona across devices, and that's one of the things that we're probably going to release. We allow people to know right now and identify users when they come from a link and say this is the same user, even if they haven't logged in. And they can like look at that data right now, but we're gonna like pull data from like the 10,000 apps and be like, we already know this is the user that just did this on the web, or this is the user that just did this on the tablet before they actually log in. Because after they log in, people already know that. But like showing them where automatically log them in, and I think it's definitely a big need. We're trying to not guess actually and only use it, so not doing the 80% because we don't think that's good enough. So only using data from other apps that have identified the user across devices and say, okay, this is the same user. And only if it's happening like 3 other apps, we know for sure it is the same person. But,
yeah. Hey, how you guys doing? Mo, I work as a product manager at Lyft, and you know, I come from a background of analytics, and one of the biggest challenges is surfacing the right data to non-analytical minds for them to make better decisions. And so I'm just curious, in your experience, what are some best practices you guys have found in helping metrics drive the right decisions instead of kind of leading to analysis paralysis or poor decision making? So maybe it's letting analytics team drive it or some other aspects. I'd just love to hear some experiences you guys may have had.
Don't ever show someone results that are not statistically significant. And if they don't know what that means, figure it out and inform the person you're showing it to what it means. Now, I think declutter, pick one metric, make sure that it's not super noisy. It takes a lot of time sometimes to figure out how to pull in the right data point to measure the right thing and make sure that it doesn't have a massive variance, and that's important. I don't know. I try to work on that with my team a lot because we often come up with numbers that move all over the place week over week, and there's a lot of seasonality in our business too, so there's a lot of different elements. So I think through it, try to explain all the nuances, and then come to a consensus about the metric that you think is the best and stick to it for a period of time.
From my perspective, I think that can be addressed a lot through, you mentioned kind of problem solving or helping maybe non-analytical minds with right decisions, right? I think I think part of it is being in the conversation, having a seat at the table, and you kind of have to, from an analytical perspective, you have to prove your way there, right, and prove your worth. But once you're there, I think really it's about understanding the problem that's trying to be solved, and often analytically, I feel like you're in a position where you have like half of the story, and you have to like pause and get the full story, so you know kind of what you're actually trying to solve in the whole context, and then you can come up with a kind of a complete analytical solution and walk somebody through who maybe isn't as analytically minded, but you can come up with like the full solution to what they're looking for instead of the anecdote or the half of the problem.
I think for us, we think it's very important. People sometimes just run experiments and forget to measure or look at and kind of reminding. Like I feel reminding the teams all the time to do that. And we actually have a few walls, and each wall with like big monitors that show, like depending on where you are in the company, show you the metrics around that. So, how many apps are you actually using our links, or what's our uptime, and then it's really interesting. Like you walk by and you're like, oh, why is this down? And just keeping it always on top of mind for people to measure, and putting your KPIs somewhere where everyone can see them. I know it's work, but our data team is awesome, and it does remind people all the time that what their KPI is, if they have to see it, and if it's like down 1 week, it's like very obvious, and everyone in the company can see it, and I don't know, just being very, very transparent. I think it's important.
That's a great point. Keeping these metrics at top of mind for the audience that is less analytically minded, because it's rare when you're analyzing really anything to have a conclusive result that is like a win for everyone involved. So I feel like we get in this pattern of like explaining nuances that are not at all helpful or clear to anybody, but they're obvious to us because we've been working on this thing for so long, so having that repeated conversation and that input of whether it's graphs on a screen monitoring various KPIs, you have more opportunities to talk about the nuances, so that the nuances start to make more sense over time, and it's less an issue of having that one meeting once a month where 8 of your 10 metrics are inconclusive, and then everyone's just confused until the next time that meeting comes around. And it's more of an ongoing conversation.
I also think always restating if you're talking about a specific experiment, always restating what the initial hypothesis was. A lot of times, as you were sort of suggesting, people get off on these awesome little experiment projects, and they're like, I'm going to test this, I'm going to test this, and then the results end up being totally useless. Even though they found something that was interesting, it just wasn't actionable, or it didn't actually tie directly into moving something forward that is ultimately the goal, or that moves something else forward that's ultimately the goal. So actually forcing people to like write out what or doing this yourself, and like writing out what the hypothesis is. Okay, if I, improve this conversion rate by X%, or if I do this, I'll move enough users in this direction to improve this conversion rate by X%, and that will in turn improve this number. And the theory is that users will respond in this way when we do this, and then test just that and try to control for everything else, which is really hard at times, but always revisiting it. Sometimes it takes hours of conversation with people to really think through what the right parameters are of the experiment, and sometimes it's worth it.
Alex, our CEO, always does, when people just present him numbers, he says, okay, great, those are great numbers, but based on those numbers, what are you going to stop doing tomorrow, and what are you going to double down on? And it's hard to answer that question a lot of times. So always like framing it that way when you look at numbers, I think it actually goes a very long way.
I think that's it. I think we're on, or do we have one more question, or?
how do you use qualitative and quantitative data together, if at all?
We have like a user experience researcher at Instacart, and we'll often use qualitative data to help generate hypotheses. So kind of like as an input, almost into a quantitative experience. So if we want to like have someone experience the app or have someone experience change, generate those ideas, then those will generate, from those we can formulate like more concrete hypotheses and then go off on a quantitative kind of experimentation process from there. It's super effective. There's sometimes things that you just cannot learn without like talking to somebody. Similarly, we have a lot of like feedback on our app, feedback from our customers, feedback from our shoppers. Sometimes we'll go through that qualitative feedback and categorize things to try and get some kind of more quantitative numbers behind them. They work together well, I think.
Yeah, I think they're critical. We do that as well with tons of surveys that we'll send out right after you purchase for the first time, App Store reviews, just trying to categorize everything. And sometimes you just read through them and have a conversation, and it helps with a brainstorming session around what like coming up with hypotheses.
We do Home Depot visits and follow people around the store. It's fun.
I think we have time for one more question, I think.
I had a question. It's more around, it's kind of product design experimentation question. So sometimes when you experiment, prove successful, that's all great. But sometimes you spend some time working on a feature, development, and then run the experiment, and the metrics don't really move. The question I had is that what can you do, or what has worked for you in the past where you do things upstream, like in the product design phase, or like earlier in the process where you do more concrete analysis, and that proved or that helped the experiment succeed, if that makes sense?
I think a lot of what a couple people have said about getting stakeholders to really be clear on the questions they're trying to answer up front can alleviate some of that. You're always going to be, you'll always have a situation where the chosen metrics for a particular experiment have not moved in a way that's conclusive at all. But when your questions about the experiment are clear up front, an inconclusive result like that is actually meaningful as well. That can tell you a lot as you back up and consider, why has this not changed at all? Why is this metric not moving? And it helps you question the assumptions that you had initially up front with the experiment. So it's definitely a longer feedback loop when it goes that way, as opposed to some conclusive results. But I think you can derive meaning even in that situation.
I've learned in the past, I think through experimentation, you're trying to improve your product intuition. And so I would kind of second that. You may have had a hypothesis that this experiment was going to move some metric, and learning that it didn't actually do that conclusively is a valuable thing, is a valuable piece of knowledge, and something you need to store away kind of in your mind and in kind of your product team's mind, of something that didn't work and was disproved. I think another thing that I've done in the past, we're working on this at Instacart as well, is we've had kind of a pretty formal experimentation forum where we get a lot of stakeholders in the room, and we review kind of a test plan and a hypothesis and what we're testing, what we're trying to do, and we get a lot of different angles of engineering angles, analytical angles, and other operations teams, other people who are affected, and you kind of really just inspect and pick apart this experiment until and you come out of that with probably a clearer design and a clearer hypothesis, and maybe even a better hypothesis and a better chance of actually measuring change in that hypothesis.
All right, well, I think that concludes the kind of presentation we had for today. I think there was some interesting insights here. We did have a scheduled flash dance, but our growth team forgot to practice, so unfortunately that's canceled. So thanks for coming out. Give a round of applause for our panelists.